Hello guys, Winston here. In my last video, I wasted untold hours optimizing my toolpaths to produce these miniature Crew Dragon capsules. The intention was to practice refining my cam strategies, and also push my Pocket NC as hard as I could without compromising reliability. And in that process, I ended up with a couple capsules to give away to friends and a few more that I would put up for sale. But after all the effort I'd put into producing these baby dragons, it seemed like a shame to just stick them in foam wrap and ship them out. So I decided to make some little gift boxes to enclose my capsules in. And since little boxes like these are really useful delivery or storage vehicles for a large number of things, I figured I would use this as an opportunity to model these boxes parametrically. That would give me a box architecture that would be super scalable for any of my future needs. Now, quick crash course for those that don't know, a parametric CAD program is one where you can build geometry with numbers and relationships. As an example, I'll model a flat plate, draw in a square hole pattern offset from the top edge, and then model in some cutouts that extend past that hole pattern. If I want to change some aspect of my design at a later date, like the size of the plate, I can basically go back in time, change a dimension, and every other feature that referenced the original geometry will update itself to conform to the relationships imposed at the beginning. Or if, say, I want to change that square hole pattern from a NEMA 17 size to a NEMA 23, I can do that, and those cutouts that came after it will reconfigure themselves to go a little bit lower on that plate. This lets you design and iterate on 3D models in a really powerful way. Engineering as we know it today wouldn't be possible without this kind of mathematically driven modeling found in programs like Creo, SolidWorks, Fusion, Onshape, and more. But what I mean when I say I want to create a parametric model is that I want to plan out those defining dimensions and relationships of my model ahead of time in a table like this. By laying out all the key values of this box, I can change things like the overall footprint of the box, the height of the box, how big its internal volume should be, and more. So now if I need to make a change to my box, I don't have to dig through my timeline, which can get pretty messy for complex projects. I don't need to ask myself, in which sketch did I define the position of this interlocking lip? I can just go to my table and say, hey, I want this lip inset 0.1 inches instead of 0.08 inches. Starting with a clear intent and plan going into a design like this made my life much easier down the road. And in CAM, I'm largely using pocketing and contour toolpaths. Since these toolpaths reference features whose internal identification in Fusion doesn't change, if I modify the dimensions of my box, the toolpaths can be easily recalculated. If you're thinking this looks really awesome and convenient, why yes, it totally is. And that's what makes designing in a proper parametric CAD environment so powerful. Once you go parametric, you don't go back. At least not for 3D parts. It's totally overkill for making science and basic woodworking type projects, but for the projects that I'm engineering, parametric is 100% the way to go. Now, if you want to watch me walking through the CAD and CAM elements of this particular box step by step, I'll be uploading a second video with those details. Link will be in the description below. That is just too much information to try and cram into a single video, and it would probably put a few of you to sleep, or worse, cause you to click off this video. So if you want to learn some basic parameter usage in Fusion, queue up my other video to play next. For now, let's head to the garage. Before we get into the actual CNC machining though, I want to shout out the sponsor of today's video, Blinkist. Have you ever found yourself with awkward stretches of idle time? Maybe you're waiting for your CNC. Maybe your CNC is waiting for you. Most people fritter away this time by scrolling through social media or otherwise wasting it on the internet. But what if you could learn something during those periods that would otherwise be wasted? Enter Blinkist, a service that distills books into their key points, called blinks, so that you can easily digest their contents in about 15 minutes. Through these high-quality summaries, Blinkist has captured the essence of over 3,000 nonfiction bestsellers across a huge variety of topics. There is something for everyone in this library, seriously. Like, check out The Machine That Changed the World by Womack, Jones, and Roos. It's about lean production. What machinist doesn't love lean production? They've also got original shows and full-length nonfiction audiobooks you can choose from, and if you purchase an audiobook, it's yours to keep forever. Right now, if you go to Blinkist.com/WinstonMoy, you can try Blinkist Premium free for 7 days, save 25% off your first Blinkist Premium membership, and up to 65% off audiobooks if you become a premium member. So go check out Blinkist if you want a quick and painless way to absorb the knowledge in books. And now, back to the fun CNC stuff. The most important thing about cutting small parts from hardwood boards is to ensure that your stock is as flat as can be. If there's any cupping or twist in your stock, you won't be able to work hold it securely. And also, the deeper into wood you cut, the more likely it is to deform further, so any unevenness is only going to get worse as you machine it. For this attempt though, I already had a pretty conveniently sized block of maple laying around that was small enough that it sat pretty darn flat. This was Giftbox Prototype 1.0, and there were a lot of little things I learned and improved on as I iterated. What I disliked about this box was that it required a tool change. That bar magnet that I used, which allowed my walls to be relatively thin, was also so skinny that it necessitated a 0.08 inch downcutting end mill to cut out a channel for it. Before you ask, I got these end mills off eBay for like $6 a piece. By switching to a circular magnet, it allowed me to use an 1/8 inch end mill for everything, so now I could load material, hit start, and come back to a finished piece. At least that was the theory. Boxes made with traditional woodworking techniques typically combine several panels that expose a lot of prepared face grain. But on a CNC, by milling apart from one solid block of material, you're going to create so many unnatural nooks and crannies and hard to sand corners and walls that cleaning up a box after the fact would be extremely tedious. Like, how could you get the machining marks out of a pocket like this, with a sanding block for ants? No, if you want to do production work on a CNC that's more than just cutting 2D shapes out of plywood, you need to put in the work up front to minimize your manual labor later. During my first batch of boxes with disc magnets, I noticed a bit of fuzz on some of the walls and some diagonal cutter marks. There were also occasional waterline marks along the walls and imperfections in some of the flat areas from when I tried to correct an undesired interference fit. By the way, pro tip, if you want to test the fit of two pieces, don't pull both of them off the CNC. Pull one of them off the machine and then fit it to the other one. That way you can at least make corrections to one of them without worrying about relocating it. Anyhow, back to perfecting my toolpaths. To combat the fuzz on my walls, I tried switching from climb cutting to conventional cutting along the walls and slowing down my feed rate. I'm using a down cutting end mill here, by the way. This is another eBay special because my favorite down cutting end mill, the Amana 46200-K, has a 1/4 inch shoulder that prevents it from being able to touch the full height of my box's sidewalls. To get the best possible surface finish on my floors, I used a pocketing toolpath with a step over between 50 to 70% of the tool diameter. Yes, you can cover more ground faster with a 100% step over, but larger step overs will exaggerate the ridges from any tram error and also show greater contrast between the different direction swirl marks impressed into the wood fibers by the end mill. I made sure my pocketing finishing toolpaths for the floors didn't touch the walls, and my contour finishing toolpaths didn't touch the floor until I had virtually eliminated any stock to leave. And then I added a final spring pass and I made sure it was all done in one go, full depth, slow feed rate, conventional milling. I figured this would give me the best shot at achieving a flawless part off the machine, and things were going really well until my finishing pass on the outside walls. So here's the thing when you do conventional cutting in wood and you're going with the grain. The cutting action of the end mill pushes the wood fibers forward and can end up shaving long ribbons of wood off your stock. Because I wanted you guys to have a good view of what was going on, I was running without bristles on my sweepy. That made the suction pretty weak, and combined with the narrow gaps between my box halves, there were a lot of chips and long strands of wood getting stuck in there. Some of those ribbons of wood managed to get sucked around my end mill, momentarily depriving my end mill the ability to cut, leaving a blemish on the wall of my box, and then breaking my end mill. Because I was fresh out of extra long 1/8 inch downcutting end mills, I switched to a compression end mill, and because the tip of a compression end mill pulls material up, it was no longer working with my adhesive work holding, but against it. So as I restarted the finishing path around the boxes, it dislodged one of the halves and chewed up the floor. The scrap heap claims another victim. I double checked the adhesion on my other pieces and continued that toolpath without any additional drama. And since I wanted to have a couple extra boxes just in case, I knocked out another trio of boxes with the last remaining bit of maple I had on hand. One thing I did notice when using this compression end mill was at the bottom edge where the upcutting and downcutting flutes meshed, there was a small line that was visible. I don't know whether or not to chalk this up to this being a low quality end mill or end grain being more sensitive to the direction of cutting pressure, but cosmetic blemishes that aren't really a result of negligence are something I will let slide. I felt pretty good about where I'd ended up with these boxes, but they were admittedly a little plain. There wasn't much to hint at the contents of these boxes. So my first thought was to fix that with an engraving, and the most obvious thing to engrave was the SpaceX Dragon logo. Using a 5 thou ball nose engraver, I tested out different ways of clearing out a shallow pocket. The first way was to actually use a pocketing toolpath, but because of how thin certain areas of the logo were, the engraver ended up blowing out the sliver of wood between the eyes and the jawline of the dragon logo. I then tried a parallel toolpath to clear out the logo, and that worked better, but it still couldn't produce a clean engraving, no matter how small a step over I used. I was running into a physical resolution limit of wood, at least with mechanical engraving. I'm sure someone could knock this out with a laser, but I really wanted to do this with a CNC milling machine. I then had a thought to replicate the design of the heat shield on the lid of my gift box. So I revolved a hemispherical cut around my lid, and then projected the web-like design of the heat shield onto that surface. If there was any misalignment in my zero coordinate while machining this domed shape though, there would be a noticeable cusp where the finishing toolpath tried to roll over the edge of the stock. I solved this problem by creating a spherical surface that overshot the bounds of my box lid. This would extend the curvature of that surface so my toolpath would terminate smoothly no matter where it would decide to make or break contact with my lid. Here I'm applying a 3D pocketing and parallel toolpath to define the 3D surface of that box. I'll follow that up with a trace operation targeting the projected sketches on that surface, but with negative axial stock to leave so it actually cuts into the box. I ended up not really liking the lines left by my engraver, so I switched back to the 0.8mm downcut. That end mill left well-defined lines with squared-off walls that provided a lot more contrast in different lighting conditions. As an experiment, I also torched one of the lids. This was something I had actually been anticipating all along, which was partly why these boxes were so chunky looking. Wood warps when you rapidly drive out moisture with heat, so to make sure the box halves would seal up seamlessly after being torched, they had to be super sturdy. Originally, I was thinking I would flame finish the lid with the dragon logo engraved, then sand away the top surface leaving only the logo dark. But the logo part of that plan was kind of a fail. With the heat shield design, the machining wasn't a problem, but because of how you would have to apply a flame to the lid to avoid scorching the sides, the middle gets extra toasty, which ablates away some of the wood, reducing the depth and contrast of the engraved portions. In the end, I really just didn't like that burned aesthetic. So I kept it simple, just plain old maple with a Danish oil finish applied. This would minimize the thickness of any built-up film, which was important because I was trying to avoid an interference fit, and oil finishes really don't raise the grain of the wood, which is important because any hand finishing you have to do on non-flat CNC wooden parts really sucks. And the final thing to do to these boxes was to glue in a magnet. You'll notice in the pockets a little extra divot left behind by a really shallow drilling operation. That was so there would be a bit of room for CA glue to overflow into and minimize seepage on the top surface of the magnet. That keeps the whole thing looking much cleaner. And that is the story of how I arrived at the design for my gift box for the mini Crew Dragon capsules. For anyone interested, I will have 4 dragons for sale next weekend. The dragons plus gift boxes will probably be priced a little south of $200, which is higher than I would like, but it's also commensurate with the amount of hours I put into these projects. If you want to support my work in a much more reasonable way though, and I can't blame you, I'll be selling the Fusion file for my parametric box design on my website for $2. It'll include both the fully parametric CAD and CAM as an example for you to work from. And of course, the other way you can support me monetarily is through Patreon, and patrons at any level do get access to a lot of my Fusion files, including for the gift box in today's video. And speaking of Patreon, the dragon capsule that I had allocated for one of my supporters has gone to Chuck, who responded to my last post with the answer of Saturn V as his favorite rocket. Enjoy the baby dragon, Chuck. I want to thank you all very much for watching. If you're interested in designing a parametric gift box for yourself, do check out my follow-on video where I'll go through a parametric modeling example in near real time and show you all the nerdy ins and outs of my gift box model. I'll be back soon with more CNC content and DIY nonsense.